Honourable Member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my honourable colleague from Bonavista, Gander, Grand Falls, Windsor. Your explanation of the bill was both fair-minded and quite elegant, and I think you did a good job both explaining the bill and also the rationale to hold parliamentarians to a higher standard because of the privileged position we hold in this House. And so you've given me a few more minutes actually to address some other points. I'm not going to explain what's in the bill since the member has done such a wonderful job doing so already. It does focus on some 24 criminal code violations. These are all indictable offences, meaning they are serious crimes that members of this House or the other place would have to commit and be found guilty of in a court of law before a pension was revoked. And that, I think, is an important part of this bill because it takes these decisions out of a political theatre and puts them into a court of law where those decisions, because these are serious matters, should rest. There is one aspect of the bill that I'd like to address, and some points that I've heard in the first hour of debate, or that have come up in discussions with colleagues here and elsewhere. The first measure is that there remains in this bill some level of partial retroactivity. Initially, when I had tabled this bill in June of 2013, I had suggested that it be retroactive, convictions be retroactive from that date forward. In the committee, that was modified, and I think modification is acceptable, so that the crime itself could have happened at any time before this bill, should it receive royal assent, come into effect, but the conviction would have to happen now on or after that date. So going forward, if this bill becomes law, it would still apply to malfeasance that occurred in the past, and I think that is a good compromise, and I understand the reasons for that was dealing with potential challenges. So that was an amendment that I thought was wise and good. This bill actually, I think, after discussion over the last 20 months, does have, and I hope it will have, support from both sides of the House here. When I first tabled the bill, I had suggested a floor of 2 years, that the minimum sentence be, the minimum sentence be two or more years. But upon consultation with members on both sides of the House, at the first hour, or the first debate, I suggested that be moved to 5 years within the criminal code, an indictable offence. And then, again, working with both sides of the House, trying to find a bill that was going to accomplish its objective, which at the end of the day was to penalize members who broke trust with taxpayers, members who, through illegal activities, misplaced, misused tax dollars. And so the bill was further refined in committee. The amendments actually I had suggested in committee to focus on violations like breach of trust, fraud, theft, forgery, or aspects that have to do directly with how we spend and use tax dollars in this place, because that is our role as legislators, is to come here and to decide on behalf of Canadians how tax dollars are going to be spent. And I'll give you one good example of why an across-the-board 5-year threshold posed some challenge. And I say this respectfully, mostly to members in the official opposition who believe the bill has been weakened because of these changes. And here's a very good example. When we're at home in our riding, we drive around a lot. And if we were to ever hit someone in our vehicle and kill them, the punishment is up to a 5-year prison term. Now, the point of this bill was never to capture someone or to have someone revoke or lose a pension through an error or momentary lapse of judgment. It was for deliberate theft of tax dollars. And so to have an across-the-board blanket meant that a member in this House, because of a terrible accident, a tragedy, and a crime, but something that was not intentional, could very well be in a position where they would lose a parliamentary pension. That's the rationale for focusing on the 24 or so provisions that are in this bill, to focus on infractions that deal directly with our duties here as parliamentarians. Now, recently, there's been a number of amendments that have come forward from the official oppositions that I must confess I disagree with. And in fact, I actually thought it was the will of this House, as I was proposing these changes, to focus the scope of this bill onto our actual duties. And in fact, I can say that because on December the 10th, the Minister for Burnaby New Westminster, when I had suggested raising it to the threshold of 5 years, said, and I quote, "However, as the member has already indicated, we would be looking at seeking amendments to change it to 5 years for a criminal offence, and we have seen, I think, from the member, some willingness to compromise on that. That is welcome," end quote. So I went back through the debates we had in this House on this bill to be sure I had understood the mood of the room. And member after member from both sides had suggested or debated or told this House that, in fact, we wanted to be careful, that we did not want to inappropriately strip a member of a pension for a violation that was not related to their duties. And it was only as one of our colleagues found himself in violation of the Election Act that suddenly the debate became, well, let's widen it now. And this is a problem because I think as we look at legislation, we have to be somewhat consistent in our approach. And so, for example, I have correspondence from the Leader of the Official Opposition who believes that, well, I'll read it. He talks about our former colleague, Dean Del Mastro, who was found guilty of breaking the Elections Act. And the Leader of the Official Opposition says this former member would have lost his full pension under the restrictions of the Nova Scotia law, which states any MLA convicted of a crime with a maximum sentence of 5 years or more in jail will lose their right to a full pension, end quote. This is actually false, because this member, while he was found guilty of a provision under the Election Act, was actually found guilty of a crime with a maximum penalty of 1 year. It didn't reach the threshold of even my original bill of 2 years. It doesn't reach the threshold of the penalty of the Nova Scotia law, nor did it ever reach the threshold of the bill when my bill, this bill, C-518, had suggested 5 years. So that's just simply not true. And it's important because the mood of this House was one where we wanted to focus on our duties as legislatures and the appropriation and the disbursement of tax dollars. So where are we at then? Where with the bill today that has gone through several hours of debate, has gone through committee, has had several changes proposed to it, which I think by and large have strengthened this bill. I will not be supporting the amendments that have been put forward by the official opposition, because actually I think they attempt to, at the last minute, the 11th hour, open this bill up in a manner that not even the Nova Scotia bill, which the NDP cites as their standard, and in fact would endanger the likelihood of this bill passing the House, because it was both government members as well as opposition members that urged me throughout the process to be very focused in this bill, to go after penalties that are in line with our duties as parliamentarians. So 20 months later, we have this bill before us, and I do hope it will receive support on both sides of the House. I believe it will receive support on both sides of the House, and I urge members to support it so we can get it off to the Senate, and I hope see it become law before Parliament is dissolved in advance of the next election. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.